today. This is going to be the event that kicks off our series called The Transition. It's a speaker series where we get to discuss and really create a conversation on how to prepare for the multitude of career opportunities post-graduation. And today we have a wonderful series of panelists from a variety of industry positions, and we're going to have them introduce themselves to start. And so I'll go and start introducing. First, we're going to start with Seth Just. And so for his bio, he sent in what he said was, I'm a staff software engineer at ECR, working on developing tools for analyzing extremely large DIA proteomics experiments. After receiving my bachelor's degree in mathematics and computer science from Reed College, I began my career working on the Scaffold suite of tools at Proteum Software, where eventually he became a principal developer. My passion lies at the intersection of software engineering and research, and I focused on improving the reliability, performance, and flexibility of tools for proteomics, metabolomics, and bioinformatics. In addition to proprietary software, I've contributed extensively to open source projects such as ProteoWizard and Encyclopedia, where in my spare time, you can find me hanging out with my cat, tinkering on old cars, or camping with my wife in various places near our home in Portland, Oregon. And so with that, we would like to introduce Seth Just. If you want to take a moment to describe who you are, what you're doing, and we will move forward. Seth?
All right, thank you guys. I am really excited to be here and share a little bit about my journey from academia into industry. So Raquel gave me a very nice introduction. So I can sort of skip over a little bit of this, if I can get it to go to the next page. So as he said, I work at ECR. So we develop automated assays to do deep unbiased proteomics at scale using engineered nanoparticles. So I actually work on sort of the downstream side of the software for handling these very large scale DIA experiments. And so my job is kind of a mix of research and software development. So working on these software tools, building the pipelines to run them in production, and then doing the data science to sort of figure out how do we want to run these tools? What are the best ways to look at our experiments? So I wanted to tell you a little bit about my journey through this transition that we're talking about here today. As was mentioned, after I got my BA in mathematics and computer science at Reed, I had a moment that I think a lot of people in this field have had of this line that I think everyone's heard. Have you ever heard of proteomics? And this was kind of the moment that I actually made my transition to industry. And began working at Proteum Software as a software developer. And I really knew nothing about bioinformatics. I knew nothing about software development even, I was right out of school. But the big takeaway I have for this is like, don't be afraid to try new things. It's a great opportunity to learn and to grow. And that's something that's possible in industry just as much as it is in academia. And it was that sort of ethos that kept me at Proteum Software and kept me learning and trying new things and getting into the DIA field. And a big part of that was having the possibility of mentorship and really finding the people in the network I needed to grow and learn and move forward in my career. And that eventually, at the beginning of this year, brought me to ECR, where I'm incredibly excited to look at taking these tools and concepts that I've been working on and moving them to a sort of a level of scale that isn't possible right now in the field. And so that was something that I really have found to help advance my career a ton is finding what I'm passionate about and really chasing after that. And that's taken me a long way. So this may not work for everybody, but I found that the combination of these three factors has really allowed me to move forward in my career, but keep in touch with the research and the academic mindset that I'm so passionate about. So there's my contact information for anyone who's interested. And if you have any questions, let me know in the Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Seth. And so as Brianna, or as our host mentioned, we are going to accept questions at the end of our introductions. And so with that, I will move on to the next panelist. And so I'd be honored to introduce Dr. Alicia Dent. And so in her bio, she mentions, I received my bachelor's degree in biochemistry and molecular biology from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County in 2012, and later worked as a post-baccalaureate scholar at the National Institutes of Health. I received my PhD in pharmaceutical sciences from the University of Maryland, Baltimore, and the goal of my doctorate research was to identify potential drug targets for therapeutics against Pseudomonas aeruginosa infections by studying pathways needed for bacterial survival and virulence. During my PhD, I received fellowships and awards such as the NIH Ruth Kirsten National Research Service Award and the Chemistry Biology Research Fellow, Meyerhoff Graduate Fellow Award, and the UMB Champion of Excellence. I'm currently a drug development trainee in the preclinical translational pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics departments at Genentech. And so with that, Alicia, we would love to hear more about you.
Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Alicia Dent. I'm going to take a second here to share my screen. All right. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. So here I'm just going to start with a bit about myself, and I'm not going to go too far back, but essentially I got my bachelor's degree in biochemistry and molecular biology from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And then from there, I decided to actually do post-baccalaureate research experience at NIH and the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. And from there, that's kind of where it kind of sparked my desire to pursue research. So then I decided to go and get my PhD from the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy in pharmaceutical sciences. And I defended in 2020, so actually during the pandemic. So my mentor was Dr. Angela Wilkes, and I studied structure, function, and regulation of the Pseudomonas aeruginosa heme uptake pathways. And so here on my side is actually a bit of my work looking at the structure function relationship of the receptors in that pathway. So during my time in grad school, I actually had quite a bit of fun, but also worked pretty hard. And so I actually chaired a 2019 Gordon Research Seminar, which is a function of the Gordon Research conferences. I was awarded the NIH F31 Fellowship along with Meyerhoff Graduate Fellowship. Presented at GRCs and published among other things. So on my route to transitioning, I was kind of torn between whether I wanted to go to into academia or into industry. And ultimately I decided that I wanted to give industry a try. I felt like academia, it just takes a bit longer for your work to come to fruition, especially if you're trying to pursue something that's a therapeutic target for a patient versus going into industry where I feel like the impact is a lot bigger. And so I ultimately decided to go into industry and obtained a position at Genentech as a scientist. So I work in the preclinical translational pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics group in development sciences, or DevSci. And that's a group within the company that really focuses on research and early development. And so my department, our motto is kind of, we develop the right drug at the right dose to the right patient. And so we kind of look at the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics relationship and provide experimental support to drive drug development, drug design, and essentially using modeling and essentially to kind of move the drug through the pipeline and to a patient. So in a sense, my day-to-day function, I work on a team of cross-functional experts across different therapeutic areas. And essentially, some days can be meeting heavy, but they're very decision-driven meetings where we kind of decide, okay, well, this is the data that we have based off of, whatever experimental data or in vitro, in vivo data that we have. And then we decide, okay, well, how does this affect our molecule? What is our target? And how, best effective to get to our end goal? So compensation for entry-level positions at Genentech, which is in South San Francisco. So we're in the Bay Area in California, tend to be a little higher. And so they kind of range from 100K to 200 plus K, but that's kind of on a bell-shaped curve. On average, you kind of fall between maybe 150 to 180. And the benefits do include health insurance, relocation, stocks, and bonus pay. And just a quick plug for some of the internships and training programs at Genentech. These are just a few, but I am technically a part of the drug development training program, which is a 3-year program in DevSci. And we do, basically you stay in a specific function for the 3 years, and the goal is to transition either into Genentech in a permanent position or another top tier biomedical research organization. They do have postdoc hiring initiatives, so they have postdocs here in industry. Those can go up to 4 years. There are summer internships for undergrads, graduate students, and even postgraduates. And there are also rotation programs for postgraduates or in early and career scientists looking to find, kind of explore what their interest is and then be considered for full-time positions in the company. I can leave my contact information with the hosts, and you guys can reach out to me if you're interested. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alicia. We appreciate you sharing a bit of your life with us. With that, I will move on to our next presenter. And so I would like to introduce Stoyan. And so in his bio, he mentioned Stoyan currently holds a position as a senior researcher at CSIR, Molecular Diagnostics and Omics Group, and head of proteomics at Resin Biosciences. After completing a PhD in structural biology, his career outside of academia began in 2008 as a postdoctoral researcher tasked with establishing a mass spectrometry facility at the Council for the Scientific and Industrial Research at CER. Over the past decade, the team and facility have expanded with the main focus on supporting clinical proteomics projects, in particular, those relating to kidney disease. As a part of the wider Diplomics network, Stoyan's team drives omics-based research in South Africa. At Resin Biosciences, he leads aspects related to the conceptualization and development of proteomics-focused solutions, as well as advice on the implementation of proteomics workflows across academia and industry. He further supports a range of marketing initiatives, including the implementation of digital as well as event-centered strategies. And so with that, I'm happy to introduce Stoyan, and we would love to hear more about yourself and your career.
Thank you very much, Raquel, for the nice introduction. And hello, everyone. Probably morning or afternoon for you guys, or where we are across the world. Maybe it's good evening. So I just want to give you like a brief introduction about myself, about my career. I currently have a dual position, so I'm gonna kind of go through my research career, but also touch on the 2 companies, CSIR and Resin Biosciences, because they are quite different in terms of where they are, in terms of size-wise, and it's quite significant differences between the 2. So, as Raquel mentioned, I started my career where I ended my academic career is essentially when I completed my structural biology PhD in 2008. And that's when I got introduced into mass spectrometry, biological mass spectrometry. I was really amazed and fell in love with the amount of detail we can get from kind of hydrogen-deuterium exchange experiments and structural dynamics of proteins. And what really drove me into, let's call it a industrial postdoc position, is the need to have access to equipment and be able to stay in that mass spectrometry arena. So I basically started a postdoc at the CSR, which is a research council. And really what drove me there is the ability to have access to equipment. And also it was exciting because at the time, one of the main tasks that I was given is to kind of set up a facility to support the institute, as well as the local scientific community with biological mass spec assays. And so I started there. About a year later, I progressed as a permanent researcher and then as a senior researcher a little bit later on. And in that time, I was growing my skills in the area of proteomics, mass spectrometry, and biological characterization. But also I was growing a small team to increase the capacity of the facility and what we can do. In about 2019, I joined Resin Biosciences as an application specialist. But really the story with Resin Bio started 6 to 7 years before that. So the Resin Bio is a spin-out of the CSR. And already back in 2010, some of my colleagues that started the company were tinkering with the technology, this polymer-based technology, which is the platform for resin bio. And a couple of years later, they came to me and said, well, can we see if we can apply it in the proteomics field? So before even the company was started, we were already working on some of the applications for proteomics. And so by the time I jumped in 2019, I had a very good idea of what the company is about. I wanted a bit of excitement. I knew the team very well, so it was quite a smooth transition. And so I'm still here. I kind of lead the proteomics applications development and methods development within the company. And I also have still a foot at the CSR at the facility. I think it's a quite important combination to have both. The facility is like a testing ground for a lot of the work we do at Resin Bio. A lot of the workflows flow into there. And similarly, a lot of methods that are developed from the scientific community using our technologies flow back to the facility to increase our capacity and so on. So just a couple of differences in terms of the two companies. When you're choosing kind of industry positions, this could be relevant. I mean, in terms of size, they're completely different sides of the spectrum. So about 2,000 employees at the CSR. We are spread out across 5 different sites or facilities. And of course, with this comes the structures that you get that help you to transition from academia to industry. I have to say that CSR is much more closer related to academia than Resin is. A lot of the things we are expected to do are actually things that you do in academia. So we expected to raise grant funding, supervise students, publish, whereas at Resin Bio, the focus is essentially pretty much streamlined, running lean, and essentially generating, growing the company in terms of in the proteomics space. In terms of my daily kind of things that I do, I mean, I always feel like you're juggling a million things. So probably one of the biggest skills I've grown over time is to be able to filter a lot of the noise, a lot of the tasks that are not important, and focus on the important things and stay aligned with the bigger picture. I do a lot of remote work. This is because I travel a lot to conferences, seeing clients for Resin Bio. So this is also something to note is that CSR, we have most of our customers and projects that are based within South Africa, where Resin has over 90% of customers and projects that are outfacing, mostly outside of South Africa. So in terms of drawing networks and stuff, this is also quite important. So yeah, let me put the handbrake for now, and hopefully we have some more questions, and I'll hand over to the next panelist. But yeah, thanks very much for allowing me the introduction.
Thank you so much, Stoyan. We appreciate hearing about you. And I will move on to our next panelist. And so I would love to introduce Jessica Espino. So Jessica Espino, PhD, completed her doctoral degree in 2020 at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, under the supervision of Dr. Lisa Jones. Her dissertation project involved the development of an in vivo workflow to characterize protein-protein and protein-ligand interactions by liquid chromatography coupled with mass spectrometry. Following graduation, Dr. Espino worked at a small startup company in Southern Pennsylvania as an application scientist developing protein characterization workflows by ion mobility. Currently, Dr. Espino is an investigator in the Structure, Function, and Characterization Group at GSK, where she works in early and late phase biotherapeutic characterization by LCMS. And so, Jessica, please share a little bit more about what you're doing now.
Hi, thank you everybody for your time, and also the organizers for inviting me. As Raki said, I received my PhD from the University of Maryland in Baltimore in 2020. So if you think about this, is like height of the pandemic. So it was kind of stressful time trying to graduate and decide where I wanted to go. So I think my career path is kind of interesting because I started my PhD in the university. I started my PhD in Indiana, and after my first year, the PI that I was with, Dr. Lisa Jones, said that she got a faculty position in Maryland, and I was kind of a road of like, well, I can either stay in Indiana, find a new faculty member, or move across the country and continue my research with I thought like, or with a great scientist. So I kind of made the jump and moved from Indiana after my first year, my PhD, to Maryland University. The University of Maryland, so where I continue doing my studies in structural proteomics. So after that, fast forward like 5 years, and I was graduated, and COVID was a thing. I was kind of torn because I had gotten engaged. My fiance at the time, now husband, was living in Jersey and had a good job in industry, and I was kind of torn between the academia path and the industry path. And to be honest, I didn't know what I wanted to do. It was more of like I wanted to do something similar to what I was already doing, but also different, which kind of like Seth said, don't be afraid to try new things. So I decided, I was like applying for industry position, I was applying for postdocs, and I was very upfront when I was going through this process of like, I moving and looking for jobs like near Jersey, near Pennsylvania, because my spouse is gonna be here, and I don't want to be far, and we don't want to do the long distance anymore. So that kind of landed me a startup company just outside of like in southern Pennsylvania, like really close to the Delaware border, which is like 10 minutes away. So I worked at this small startup company, which was a mass spec instrument company, for about a year, and then halfway through this year of like realize of like there's a lot of pros of working for a small company. Everything you do, it's amazing for a small company, meaning that like it's there, you wear, like you probably have heard these, like you wear multiple hats, where you have many roles, and then I can really walk up to the CEO's office and then like tell her like, hey, how's your day going, or talk about like projects that we were working on. And then you also get experience really really fast because it's very fast moving. However, the work-life balance is a little bit lacking. You also limited in resources. As a startup company, you don't have a lot of money, or a lot of the money that you have is like tied to your investors and giving them what the goals that you told them, and also the risk of this startup company that you have funding for X amount of years. So like if you don't start making money after those years, then you might not have a job. So the other thing that like this job taught me was that um, really what I wanted to do. I realized that I was working for instrumentation on mass spec, which was a little different than what I did for my PhD, but I really started enjoying the biopharma collaborations. So this led me to go apply for a position at GSK, whereas where I am now as an investigator in the mass spec group. So kind of what I do now, I'm in the chemistry, manufacturing, and control group, CMC. And what I do, I'm farther into that. I'm in the structure function characterization group. And my job, if you remember for biology, when your professor would say like structure leads to function, that is what my job is. My job is to try to figure out build these structure function relationships between protein candidate or like monoclonal antibody, and doing these by mass spec. So one of the things I have liked so far about like big pharma or a larger company with like thousands of employees is that there's a lot more job stability. Like I have no doubts that GSK will still be around in 10 years and 20 years. The work-life balance is a lot. If you saw my previous life, I do a lot of things outside of work. I play softball with my coworkers. I play soccer on the weekends. I go on bike rides. So like I have more flexibility with that. There's a lot of resources. There's like anything that I want, if like I need for an experiment, or like, yeah, I just buy it. And then also resources within like the group. If there's a question about an experiment or something that needs to be done, I'm not the one always doing it. I can go to a different group and be like, hey, we have a question about this. Can you point us on the right direction? And there's also the opportunity of moving laterally over time. So I've only been here for a year, but I've had workers that say, well, like I used to be in the small molecule group, and I'm now in the large molecule, or like, oh, I started in discovery and now we're in development. So there's like a lot of that. The cons about it is that sometimes you do get the feeling that you're like a little fish in a big pond, but I think it just kind of comes over time once like you start getting rid of that imposter syndrome of like, I don't really fit in, because you'd like get like maybe everybody feels the same way. And as well, like the more I'm around, the more that I learn the process, I feel more comfortable, and I can finally start being like, oh, this makes sense, or this relates to something that I learned. So that's kind of has been my experience. I didn't put this in here, but we do have an open position in my group for small molecule mass spec. So if you know that, get my contact information, and I'd be happy to tell you maybe how you could come join us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica. And last but certainly not least, I'd be happy to introduce Dr. Erin Robinson. So Dr. Erin Robinson is a scientist at Immunex Pharmaceuticals Incorporated, a Sanofi company specializing in the quantitative mass spectrometry-based discovery proteomic screens using cutting-edge methodology and instrumentation. Prior to joining Immunex, Dr. Robinson was a postdoctoral fellow in the Snyder Laboratory at Stanford University, working on multi-omic integration of human disease. He received his PhD at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. It was co-mentored by Dr. Shelley Liu and Jennifer Van Eyck. And so with that, Erin, we'd love to hear more about you.
Great, thanks for the introduction. And thanks everyone for letting me be on this panel. It's a really, really unique experience. So I wanted to echo what Jessica just mentioned about being at a small biotech startup and how it's a bit different than a larger company. So I started at Immunex Pharmaceuticals about 2 years ago when we were a group of about 40, and I was in the discovery division, which was a really small group of probably 5 to 10 people. We recently got acquired by Sanofi. So we basically went from, a company that was 80 at the time to 100,000. So I'm kind of experiencing the shift between a small startup and a large biopharma. They're both unique in their own ways. Personally, I like the smaller startup atmosphere a little better, but it's they're both provide some really cool experiences. So I wanted to tell you guys a little bit more about what we do at Immunex and some of the stuff that I can do with discovery mass spectrometry. So at Immunex, we work on T-cell engagers, which are basically next generation cancer immunotherapy treatments. And basically it's a bispecific antibody. One side of it binds to the tumor cell and the other side calls in a T-cell. It works really well at killing any tumors. And the only issue is that you need a really clean target or else there's a lot of toxicity. And at Immunex, we've developed something to help with that. And what we do is we actually make a prodrug. It's an X10-ylated protease activated T cell. And all X10 is, it's a universal mask of just G, A, S, T, E, and P, just a bunch of amino acids kind of randomly put in there. It's this kind of wiggly thing on the side. And it completely stops the activity of our T cell engager. And the way that this prodrug becomes active in tumors is we have a protease cleavable linker that's right here. You can guys kind of see it. And we built this to be cleaved by 8 different proteases across a broad breadth of tumors. And we've also are able to do some really cool LC-MS PK analysis, which is an MRM technique to try to get an idea of where it's cleaved and by what protease. So our drugs work really well. This is an in vivo study where you can see that this is the control of this tumor. It's a HER2 T-cell engager. And then once you add the drug, it completely gets rid of the tumor. They're also very safe. This is a cyno study. So this is something that you guys probably don't realize. But in industry, you actually have to test your drugs in mammals and in primates. So these are in cynomolgus monkeys. And here you can see that these animals do really well and that our drug has a really long half-life. So that's another thing that this X10 provides, is much longer half-life versus the naked T-cell engager. So what I do at Immunex is pretty cool. Is I basically work on designing the next generation T-cell engagers and mainly trying to figure out how to make our protease cleavable linker better. And really, this is basically the project that I'm working on, is trying to understand the protease microenvironment in tumors and figuring out what proteases unmask our drugs in tumors or in normal tissue and in inflamed tissue. And the whole goal is to try to build a more fine-tuned cleavable linker, which has the ability to really work and give us a drug with a much higher therapeutic index. So this was kind of a fun little exercise that we had where we came up with a name for this project. We called it Project OPAL, Omics of Protease Activated Linkers. And this was just a brainstorming session that we had with our team. And I liked OOPS the best, but we ended up going with OPAL. It sounded a little bit better. So I can't really go into some of the details just due to it being proprietary, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out. And this is our site in South San Francisco. And I think I'm over here, and this was our old CEO, Angie. When you get acquired, generally the senior management ends up leaving the company, so she's now moved on. So of a couple other people, but the same core of people are still there. And we are hiring. You can visit our website at ammunix.com, or just email me, and I could put in a good word for you. And with that, thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aaron. And so with that, we are going to begin the part of our panel where we start asking questions. And so we already have one in our Q&A from Ethan. Thank you for your input. And so what his question is were there particular moments where your trajectory changed, as in you thought you were going to do one thing, for example, stay in academia or a different field in life sciences, but instead you realized that wasn't your best option? And so panelists, please feel free to unmute yourself and contribute. Okay, perfect. And so did everybody hear that question?
Yeah, maybe I can start. Because I don't think I have had a moment in my career where things have sort of shifted gears like that and subverted my expectations. I've very much sort of had a fairly clear path forward at all times, and I think I've stuck to that. The places where I feel like kind of I've seen a shift in my career is when I come across something that has, something new that I've learned, that I've picked up, and that I find myself being passionate about. So the big moment in my career was actually the development of sort of DIA proteomics as a more common workflow, and then really getting into the tools and the techniques that are specific to that sort of analysis. And that was something that sort of came up as an incidental project. It was one of many things that I was working on. And that, because it's something I'm so excited by and I feel has so much potential, is something I ended up pursuing and chasing a lot, which brought me to my current position where that's all I'm really working on. Is DIA. So I guess yes and no.
So maybe just to add to Seth's point, I think for me also, there hasn't been, I think, set points where things have changed drastically. It's almost this transition where you start finding new things and you follow kind of your passion. I mean, so already from my academia days, I knew I wanted to stay in mass spec, and for me to stay in mass spec, I wanted to go to industry because it gives me the accessibility to do mass spec, especially in our environment. And then going into resin bio, it was a transition. I mean, so the company wasn't even existing before when we started developing workflows in proteomics, and it almost becomes like your passion. It becomes your child that you want to grow, and you put so much effort into it that you want to see it through. And that kind of how things flowed for me.
Yeah, I could add on to that a bit too. So most of my PhD was around DIA. And when I started in industry, I was like, oh, this will be super easy. All I need to do is just run these DDA experiments and just integrate peaks and skyline. And I did that for a few weeks, and it got really boring, as you guys could imagine. So part of what I've done is actually shift our lab to start using DIA-based approaches. We're using DIA-NN for data analysis. We got one of the new Xenotoph 7600s, which is doing a pretty good job at running our DIA experiments. And I think that's something that industry provides that academia doesn't, is I was actually able to build my experiment around DIA. So instead of dealing with a bunch of peptides that occur naturally in the body, I'm actually purchasing, hundreds of thousands of synthesized peptides with MS tags so that I know that, I'll get a really good Y5 ion and I can quant that and combinatorially. So you have these really unique challenges, but you could use your resources to help solve those challenges in a better way.
Awesome. Ladies, did you have any input before we move to the next question?
I would just like to add, I guess, having worked at a company for 1 year after my PhD, and then right after 1 year moving on to where I am now, of if you learn something in your current position of where you are and you realize like that's not a good fit for you, like don't be afraid to just like jump and like find something else. Because I graduated thinking of like, wow, I really want to learn mass spec instrumentation and I really want to learn about how to build mass specs. And then 1 year into this job, and I was like, you know what, I miss the solving the biological problems. I miss being on the lab more of like, what is the instrument helping solve rather than why am I making this instrument? So it like I definitely had that point of like, no, you know what? Like I rather be on a more like where I'm like just creating like the data myself rather than just kind of build having on the side. So yeah, like I had that change and like it kind of just came from like the collaborations that I had in my previous role where I'd learn of like, okay, no, like I really enjoy biopharma and I really enjoy these molecules, so that's what I want to do. So I was able to kind of look for that position, and my first position helped me identify that.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Alicia, I think I heard you chiming
So
in.
for me, I pretty much was a little torn when I was looking for my transition, especially since it was the height of the pandemic. I knew that I wanted to go into industry, but around that time, I felt like everything was kind of closing down in a sense. And so it was just like, oh, this is just my luck, right? I'm going to have to go and do a postdoc because that's, I think, a bit easier to acquire than an industry position at this point in time. So I actually had lined up a number of postdocs and was interviewing, but hoping and praying that an industry position would open up. And luckily it did. And I guess I was torn because I do love the bench work. My PhD was in biochemistry, my undergrad was in biochemistry, and I worked with bacteria in grad school. But I felt like I didn't want to stay at the bench forever. I feel like there's so much more to a scientific position than just being at the bench and generating the work. There's a lot of other ways that you can engage the science without having to physically be doing the, pipetting yourself. And so now I'm in a role where I get to engage people a lot more, which is something that I never thought I would do, but I'm learning a lot of skill sets and a lot of soft skills and a way to manage people and a way to interact with people and how to kind of corral them in a sense so that we all align and all, agree on a message and how we want to move forward. And I feel like it's a skill set that I didn't quite develop in grad school, but I'm certainly building muscle for it now. And so for me, it was just like, don't be afraid of getting out of your norm and completely transitioning to something different than what I did my PhD in. And I'm giving it a try now. And I like it. But if I don't, you can always move. You are not tethered to a place unless for some reason you want to be near your family or whatever the case is. But there are opportunities out there. Do not be afraid to work them.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your unique experience. Excuse me. And then we have another question from our audience. Alexander posted a question for startup versus big industry. I'll be starting a startup later this year, but I want to use it as a stepping stone into bigger industry in a couple of years. What is most useful to focus on to make this transition?
I think I could take that since I kind of just did that transition. so basically, when you're at a startup, you have a lot of hats that you wear. And I think what you need to do is really figure out what you like doing and really try to push towards doing that. So for example, when I started at Ammunix, I was helping our patent lawyer look for patents for I don't know, PSMA antibodies. And that was really cool. And it really introduced me to something that I didn't even know existed. Also, I was able to join the scientific advisory board meeting because I was helping us search for new targets. And that was also really cool to kind of see that other side of things. But when you are at a bigger company, you're kind of going to be siloed a little bit into what you're doing. So I would really take that time at a startup to really broaden your scope of the work that you're doing and figure out what you like doing the best. To be honest, I would rather be in a startup than a big company just because it's more fun and fast paced. But I guess sort of see where it takes you, and then you can make that decision in a couple of years.
Yeah, that's very much in line with my take and sort of the advice that has guided me in my career, which is at a startup, right? There's so much work to be done. There's so many problems to solve and not enough time. So you have all this opportunity to see a problem and say, that's something I'm interested in learning about, or that's something I can apply my skills to, and really dive into it, try it out, see if it's something that you're successful at or that you are excited by. And that's great because you can build those skills. And if it doesn't end up being something that's passionate about, you can move on and you can try other things. And definitely as you move into larger companies, right, these problems, there are people who are supposed to solve them. There's ways to address these challenges. And I think this is where sort of the interplay between academia and industry is so important, is that at these smaller companies at the startup scale, so much of this academic mindset is applicable to what the company needs, but also applicable to what you can do to grow your own career.
If I can add, I think for me, and I completely agree with the previous two views, one of the biggest benefits that I've seen from being in a small company, which I didn't even realize it's going to happen, is the networks that I've built over time. Because by default, in a small company, you have to put yourself out there. You want to tell your story to as many people. You go to conferences, you go to workshops, and your clientele and customers are mostly going to be spread across the globe. And so this is I think one of the most important things you can get out of a small company with the networks you're going to build, because they will open a lot of doors for you afterwards. So I think it's been a really, really important thing for me. I didn't even realize it's going to happen when I started into this journey.
Yeah, I agree with everybody's point, especially the last one, which I was going to mention, of just sharing your connections that you make. You're going to go to a lot of conference, you're going to talk to a lot of people, and even within your group or your company, like some people might come and some people might go from the company. So make sure to keep in contact with those people, because those are the ones that are going to help you get your next role. The field is really small, and it gets even smaller once you start kind of getting into the in your path of you're not doing research anymore, or you're not a student anymore. It's just everybody knows everybody. So if you start sharing and really keeping in contact with those people, it really helps you move on to what you want next.
Awesome, everyone. Thanks for sharing. Were there any more comments before we move to the next
just one more comment, which is right. The networking is so important to building a career anywhere. And I think that it's absolutely correct that a small startup is a great place to do that. But it's also a great place to find mentorship and build deeper relationships, right? You're working with a small group of people. You have a lot of access to people who are very talented and specialized in their knowledge and experience. And so I think there's a ton of opportunity to build not just a big network across the field, but also a network of close mentors and collaborators who can really lift you up and help you kind of learn those things and make those steps in your growth.
One thing I'd like to add is that if you're looking to transition into big pharma, be sure you know what those positions are looking for and definitely utilize your social networks. LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever it is or platform that you're on, likely if you're in this space, you know a lot of other scientists. And so those scientists are also transitioning and making, decisions as they go along, and be sure to keep in contact with them because you never know where a person's going to end up. And that could certainly help you as you transition into your own space or even the company that they're at. Having someone vouch for you is a big deal. So absolutely utilize, that information highway. It is probably going to be your best bet.
Awesome. And to kind of tag along with what our panelists are saying, I think I agree completely. Your network is your net worth. And a lot of times, a lot of the most successful people I've seen have never actually applied for jobs. They've just either been recommended or a position has been created for them because they know the right people. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And being connected and in touch. And like Alicia said, having somebody be able to vouch for you and your work ethic stands a lot more than you just submitting an application. And so that's something I've noticed and a little bit of, advice I've absorbed over the years. And with that, we can move on to the next question. We have a lot of good questions from our audience. And so the next one is by Lavender. And so she said, or he or she says, I noticed a lot of opportunities for cutting edge research that are in California or the East Coast, where the cost of living is really high. I love this question, by the way, because I'm making that commute myself. I'm wondering if you know from your own experience or from people you know that the postdoc salary, or if the postdoc salary will be enough for a family that has 3 young children. Do you have some suggestions on how to balance family/children and work, or balance surviving financially and pursuing cutting edge research?
So since I'm in California, I can elaborate on that. So let me speak specifically to Genentech. So the postdoc salary at Genentech certainly starts you out higher than you would an academic postdoc. I believe academic postdocs have recently hit 50K or so, or maybe just a bit above that. Genentech postdocs start you out at about 85. And that is really key because of how expensive it is to live here. Now, a single postdoc salary for a family of 4, including 3 children, is still going to be rough. The best way you can kind of mitigate that is to, one, you have to be more realistic about the areas that you can afford. A 2-bedroom apartment in San Francisco can easily run you $3,000 to $4,000, unfortunately. And there's not reasonable housing for lower income or income that has to be spread across a number of individuals. And so you have to be more realistic about where you can live and what resources are available to you. Honestly, and this is my opinion, you don't want to stay in a postdoc for too long. The reason why you might struggle in this area is because people tend to kind of stay in postdocs and they linger there for a very long time. Use your postdoc as a transition and get out of there and transition into a role that can actually support your family and life that you want to have. I see far too many people fall into the postdoc trap. But the good thing is that postdocs at Genentech, they have a limited time frame. You have up to 4 years here and they expect you to move on. And whether that's transitioning into a role at the company or another top tier biomedical company or into academia, but the point is they expect you to transition and they can help you with that transition.
I want to add to just doing a short postdoc is okay. So I started my postdoc in January of 2020 and then COVID hit. And I mean, it was pretty much a remote postdoc anyway. But I ended up leaving after about 7 or 8 months because this opportunity at Immunix came along actually through the Stanford job board, through the genetics department. And I'm like, oh, this perfectly fits my skill set. At the time, I didn't want to leave my postdoc. I'm like, I've got this, good remote life. It's all going well. The salary is not high, but it was enough to, get by on. I'm like, I could do this for a couple more years, but then I really thought about it. I'm like, what am I learning in this postdoc that's going to help me in my next position? And I thought about that a bit, and I'm like, not too much. So I've learned way more at Immunix. I didn't have any instrumentation skills, and I now run like a QE Plus in the Xenotop 7600, and have learned how to do MRM, a bunch of other stuff that I just wouldn't have got in that postdoc. So, multi-omics integration is cool, but it's just not there yet in industry. So I knew that I wasn't learning enough in my postdoc to keep going at it.
Does anybody else have anything they wanted to contribute before we move to the next question?
I think that the others have really good answers for this. The only thing I would add is that remote work is very much becoming a possibility, right? The companies that are doing this, they may be on the East Coast or in California, but not all of the roles necessarily are. And there is some leverage there. People with this expertise are very valuable. And if you can do your job remotely, it's definitely worth pushing for it to some degree. That's the situation I'm in. Cyr is in the Bay Area. I'm in Portland. And I'm very lucky that I don't do any wet work. I don't touch instruments. But it's definitely something to think about with these challenges.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your input. And so our next question comes from, I apologize if I butcher your name, but I'm going to do the best I can, Krutika. And their question is, what were some of the challenges you faced when you were transitioning from academia to industry? For example, going from a PhD to an industry position, and do companies look for people with prior experience, publications, or a long track record in a specific field? How do you set yourself up during your student life to make that transition?
I'll say like network. When I was looking to graduate, and kind of what Alicia was saying, that like it was in the middle of COVID, a lot of industries weren't like hiring, or they had positions open, but because they didn't know what was like when people were gonna go back into the lab, these positions were just kind of like frozen. So I went through my network of the people that I knew, and I say, hey, I'm graduating. Does your group have any position open? And I got a lot of no's and I got a lot of maybes too. I got a lot of like, we had this position open since January and we don't know what's happening with it. So the best that you can do is just go through your network, and even if it's a graduate student that came, I think that's how I ended up on my first job at a startup, at a small company, by doing another group that's called kind of something like this. It's called like Females in Mass Spectrometry. And I say, hey, I noticed there's this company and it has this position open. Can you put me in touch with your board member that kind of helps you out? And they're like, yeah, sure. And I emailed the CEO directly, because it was a company at the time of like 30 employees. So like, she like messaged me back, actually HR messaged me back being like, hey, I got your email through somebody else. So yeah, it goes back to the network of like, the worst that they can do is tell you no, and then okay, cool, they don't have anything for me, and then I'll move on to the next person. So that was kind of my experience.
I have something to add to that. So when mainly the question about whether you're looking for prior experience or publications, it really depends what type of job you're looking for. For we've just hired a couple of mass spectrometrists and are in the process of doing that. And, if we want someone to actually, run the instrument, we're not going to hire someone fresh out of undergrad for that, right? They need to have some relevant skills. But let's say you're hiring someone to just do a bunch of Western blots or things like that. You could teach them that in a couple of days. So it really depends on the type of job you're applying for. But, another big thing too is to generally, when you have a job application, you actually will have an interview where you present some of your prior work. And that's really important. And based off of those interviews, I'll be like, well, actually, there's been a couple times where we had some follow-up interviews, one-on-one scheduled, and we just canceled it because their presentation was so bad. So really put some time into your presentation and just show what you can do. And as long as you have that one skill that they're looking for, just show that you're willing to learn more. And that's really all you're looking for in industry, is someone who's willing to step in and solve these new challenges.
Yeah, I agree. I think just to add to your last point, Aaron, try and expand your skills as much as possible outside of the technical, because then you look so much more applicable to different positions. So if you can do that, I think you've got much more chance. And again, we keep banging on about networks. I think that's as much as you can expand your networks. And I mean, never say no to anything. Like somebody asks you to do a webinar or presentation, just do it. Like push yourself to be out of your comfort zone. And that's how your networks grow. We as scientists tend to be like introverts and we want to be comfortable in our little bubbles, but you need to put yourself out there as much as possible. And that's how things happen. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely echoing all of that. Put your name out there however you can. Build your network, ask around, go up to people at conferences and introduce yourself. Another thing that's worked for me, this is a little more niche though, maybe, is open source software. Is a great opportunity to get your name out there and engage with really smart people. If that's something that's sort of the way that you work and you deal with software, go and dig into the code of some open source projects, put up some pull requests. That's gonna go a long way to showing what you can do and what you're into.
One thing I would add is if you're applying to industry and let's say you have a very likely what you're doing might be a more like a niche role. Not everyone's looking for that. So don't take the no's personally. It's not a judgment of your character or the work that you've done. It's really, they have a very highly specialized role that they want to fill, and maybe you don't quite fit it. It doesn't mean that you won't ever fit another position or role somewhere else. It just means that that specific company, it's not for you. And so you just have to be extremely diligent and apply and apply and apply. You will likely get 10 to maybe 20 no's before you get a yes.
And I guess one last thing that I think I want to add, also like on the apply, it's like if you think that you check, like don't try to check all the boxes. You're going to see job descriptions that have like a list of like 20 things that they're looking for a candidate. But if you check like half of those boxes or even like 1/3 of those boxes, if you're like, you apply for the role, because you never know that they might just be like, they're looking for this ideal candidate and like, the ideal candidate might be there, but they might be in a position where they're desperate to fill the role, and then they will be happy to take it if it meets like half or 1/3 of the requirements that they have.
I do want to add one more point to that. It's a little bit tangential, but if you do end up having an interview that goes well, don't be scared to negotiate your salary, because that's a conversation that you're going to have with your employer. And there's almost always some wiggle room with stock options or salary. And that's something that I know I was scared to do, but ended up working out pretty well for me. So it's something that I highly recommend, and just don't sell yourself short.
Awesome. And so with that, we'll move on to the next question. This is from Patswana. It is specifically for Dr. Stoyan. Do you think there is an opportunity for MS-based proteomics in South Africa to grow?
Yeah, I mean, awesome question. I actually want to expand this to the rest of the panel. I think it sounds like, most of us are doing some kind of biological mass spectrometry angle. So like, what does everybody feel about proteomics? Where is it going next? My personal opinion is that we are at a very exciting interface. So proteomics, biological mass spec is moving from being a research tool to being an applied tool. And I think we're just starting to scratch the surface of what's possible in terms of clinical applications. If you look at where genomics was 10 years ago, we are still not there because we're not as robust and high throughput. But I think we're getting there. So I think the opportunities are really amazing. And that's why I'm in that field. And whether we're in South Africa or in the US or anywhere, I think it's an exciting field to be.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Our next question is from Alexander. And it says, regarding leaving a postdoc early when the opportunity arises, what are the pros and cons of staying a bit longer to finish all your ongoing projects? Do companies down the road even care about extra publications coming out if you have your next position lined up already?
Yeah, I was just in that, so I guess I'll answer it. Basically, they don't care. If they're gonna hire you based off of your skill set, and if they're interested, they don't care if you've got more publications coming. And it is tough to leave an ongoing project, especially if you haven't made that much progress, or you feel like you're close enough where you might be able to finish it. But the project will get done eventually. You just have to remove yourself from that and sort of do what's best for you and your career.
I would add that it's very easy to get caught in that mindset where you're just like, oh, I'm so close to something, I just need to wrap it up. And then you're there for 2 more years. So be really realistic and have a conversation with your mentor about what the expectations would be to wrap up that project if you are truly committed to getting the papers out of that. But don't let it jeopardize your ability to transition to an opportunity where you essentially already secured the role. And I totally agree that they don't care. If they've agreed to bring you on, the additional publications don't make a difference.
Yeah, just echoing that, if you've learned what you're there to learn and you have the skills that you need for the next stage in your career, sticking around to finish things isn't necessarily going to make a big difference. What's going to make a difference is the skills that you take with you when you leave.
The other thing is too, if you've made a significant amount of work on the publication and it's only a bit left, I mean, likely you would either still be first or even potentially second author. There's no real need for you to stay and actually do every single thing else. Like, it will get done. Someone else will carry on the project, whether you're there or not.
Awesome. Thanks for your input, guys. And so to follow up on that question, do you feel papers mattered much during your job search? And what are some of the most important things to beef up your CV in preparation to securing a position?
I think the number one thing is you need to be just a really strong advocate for yourself. Don't downplay what you've done. It's so hard to look at your track record and distill that into a set of bullet points, a set of skills. But even if it was a small project, if it was a one-off thing, if you feel like you learned something from it, that's an important takeaway. And so very much like be an advocate for yourself and put in your CV put your best foot forward. Don't question yourself and tear yourself down. I think that a lot of us in this field and in academia have a lot more skills than we might necessarily put in a list off the bat.
I think also when you're applying for a position, don't just apply with a generic kind of CV and resume. Try and think of what the position really entails and how your skills fit that position, because there will be specific things that are unique to you that you can highlight for that specific position, and the next one will be different. So you need to spend the time and kind of hone your CV for that specific requirement.
Were there any more comments?
I was just going to say that advice sort of dovetails with what we were saying earlier about apply to positions that you don't meet all the qualifications for, because what they're going to look for is for you to sell yourself as someone who will be able to do some of that role, but also do other things, like have a well-rounded idea of what you're capable of. So if you look at a job description and it has 5 skills that you don't have, but 5 skills that you do, write a little story about how you would use the skills you have and bring other things that might not be in the job description, and really sell an idea of what your vision of yourself is fitting in.
Yeah, to Seth's point, that's something, especially at a small company, that's huge, right? If they could see that you could do a couple of those things really well, but add a whole another skill set that they may have not even known they were looking for to the table, that's really big. And you would probably have the ability to expand your job to those other skills, if it makes sense.
One of the things I think I would add on that, if you get to the point where you're talking to the hiring manager, a lot of ways that it's going to happen is that you're usually going to talk to HR. They're going to do like a phone screening, and they're going to tell you like the best salary, kind of move forward, and then to the hiring manager. Do a little research about the job. Like, if you see acronyms that you're like, what are these? Like, at least trying to understand, and then you can show that you kind of know what the role is going to be. And I'm saying this from experience. When I was applying to my job, like I had no idea what CMC analytical was. Like I, right before the phone screening with the manager, I Googled what CMC analytical, and then when my now manager asked me like, do you know what this is? I kind of explained it to him, and he's like, yeah, that, like, more or less that. So like if you can impress them and show them that you at least have a, like, yes, you're not an expert in the field, but if you have a general understanding, and you can tell them like, I think I will fit good within your group because of these and because of my skill set, they will be more likely that invite you back or give you the job, because they know that you have this understanding, or you can conceptualize and fill the gap that they need.
So I just want to echo what everyone else said, but I do have an example of where selling yourself is actually key. So I was actually part of an interview process for the next cohort of DDTP trainees. And there were quite a few people in that interview process that totally fit the bill for what the company was looking for, but they did not sell themselves well. Either their presentation looked nice, but maybe they stumbled through it a bit, or when they answered questions, they weren't quite, knowledgeable or of certain things that were being asked of them, whereas others who were maybe 50% of the way there had clearly done their research and were able to really just hone in on the things that they do very well, and were actually able to obtain a position where, again, they had somewhat fit the role, but can show that they were able to kind of like do the work. And so really it's your ability to kind of brand yourself and to present your best self to your committee. You could actually, gain a position over someone who is a better fit for the position.
Awesome. And so it sounds like a lot of what you guys are mentioning is sort of personal and professional promotion, being able to advocate for yourself. And so to follow up on sort of what we just discussed, would you say that it's more important to apply to these sort of industry positions with a broader aspect, or to be more hyper specific on what you know you're good at and what your skill sets are? Because I see sort of a little bit of where both of those could be valuable, but is it like an application of when to apply? Okay, like, and say, hey, I'm broadly applicable here, versus I'm highly specific, can do X, Y, and Z, and would be an asset for either of those reasons.
I think it depends on what you want. If you want to transition into a role that, maybe you have some understanding of the role, but there are other aspects of it that you want to learn because it's something that you're truly interested in. I think if you apply and just clearly state that I may not have all the skill sets, but this is something I want to transition to because I believe in this and I'm interested for this reason, companies are really compelled when someone truly, they can see the drive behind someone. They can truly see, oh, you know what, this person really wants to do this for this reason, and it looks like they're committed. They would be willing to train you into those, those roles, and then you gain a whole new skill set going into a position that you didn't quite have. But if you want to kind of focus on something specific, then maybe you hone it in on more of a niche role. But I think it varies. There's no one shoe that fits all kind of process. Different companies approach it different ways, but you have to be more realistic about the expectations at what you actually want to get out of it, and be clear about that with the person that you're applying with.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that as well is really look at the company you're applying to and make sure it's a company that you believe in, that you're going to want to work for a long period of time. And that's a really good kind of, they got to pass the test. Like, all right, does this actually make sense? Do I think this will work? Is this, then even the culture, which is something that we haven't even brought up today, trying to get a good feel for, what the people in the company are like, what the working styles are like, and just making sure that you fit into that is really more important than you would think.
Your coworkers are really gonna make or break your job. Because I mean, like, if you're not, if you could love the science that you're doing or the job that you're doing, but if you hate your coworkers, you're not gonna have a fun time, and that's really gonna matter.
Yeah, whether it's a small company, there's just 3 of you in a room, or if it's a huge company, your number one resource is going to be the people you're working with. So definitely assess that and figure out how you would fit into that environment. And especially in the startup space, but even in certain groups in bigger companies, it's so important to pitch yourself as being able to learn what you need to move that group forward. And so I think that it's less important to have an item on your resume, a project that says you worked on this specific thing. And it's much more important to show that you're willing and capable to learn and take on new things.
Awesome. Do we have any more comments before we move to the next question? If not, we have a question from Saeed. Do you need any particular experience transitioning from academia as a postdoc into a business functional role, such as business development staff and industry, given your background has been solely or purely at the bench?
I don't really have this experience, but I have some idea of what this role entails. A lot of times people will, instead of doing a postdoc, will actually work at a consulting company for a year or two, and then they'll transfer into that business development. That's what our old CEO, Angie, did, and a couple of people that I worked with at Ammunix. And consulting is basically like a postdoc. It's just super fast-paced, something you can't do for more than a few years, but it does give you that introduction to business development. I'd recommend maybe going for that sort of a route.
So from my experience, or what I can see within my company, is that people who are hired outright, at least externally from the company into the company, either have a PhD and potentially an MBA. However, the good thing about Genentech is that they do have these things called rotations. And within the company, if you're at a bench-based role, but you're interested in maybe pursuing or just getting some exposure to the business side of the business, you can actually do a rotation. And if you truly are you fall in love with it, they would actually allow you to transition internally. And so it kind of just depends on the company that you're at, but I would do some research on that and see people who are in those who came from a bench-based role into, those business roles, what kind of experience and degrees do they have? You might want to seriously look into an MBA.
Yeah, and I think this kind of what Alicia was saying kind of goes back to what I mentioned on my slides of with big companies, you have more opportunity to move laterally in a lateral way within your organization, where GSK has something very similar. We call it secondment, where you have a role let's say mine, like a research investigator, but you can go and work for 6 months or a year in a different role since the secondment, and learn something else, something new. And in more ways than not, a lot of these secondments usually turn in a new role within the same company, which large companies like to do, because it kind of, in a way, it becomes like an academic way of set of view of they're retaining employees within the company. So people like to see that they're able to, yes, the employee left the group, but the employee didn't leave the company. So they have this retention rate within the company, which they like to put as numbers to show that employees are happy and the employees still like the company. So that's very nice that I know I'm not at the point where I want to do these yet, because I'm still learning my role, but I know other people within my group have done that, where they've done these secondments and they kind of learn a new skill and then able to move on from there.
Any more feedback from our panelists? Awesome. And so the next question is also from Saeed. And I think this is a really good question, because this is a dialogue that I've seen created on platforms like TikTok and LinkedIn and other forms of social media. And so in a 10 to 15-year timescale, is it best to diversify your experience in multiple companies, or better to stay at one company and grow within the eco space? And I think it would also be important to talk about not just the experience, but the sort of increases that you would get as you grow either through a company or when you transition to a different one.
My comment will be, it will depend on the company, but if you feel like you got no more to contribute and no more to learn, it's time to move. I think it's all about growing your skills, growing personally even. And this comes from a person that I've been essentially in one place, more or less, in institute, growing to a startup company. but I always find new challenges, and so that's what's kept me staying in that place. But if I feel that I've got no more to contribute, or I think like I must always feel like I need to learn more, like I don't know enough. And if I feel like I have enough information and I need to start a new challenge.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, exactly that. I was in my previous position for 9 years, but and that was a real, that was something I reassessed, and that was challenging, because it is true, especially in tech and in software, which is the space that I'm in, that you can get a really good raise by moving jobs every 18 months, 2 years. But that isn't necessarily the best choice for your own growth and the direction that you necessarily want to go in. And especially if you're in a niche field like proteomics, I mean, that's changing. I think there are more opportunities now than there were, 5-10 years ago. But it's so important that you have something that you're learning, that you're chasing. And that's what kept me with proteome software for so long, was that every couple of years I was moving on to new projects, I was moving on to new roles, I was facing new challenges. And ultimately I reached a point within that team that I wasn't able to keep learning. It was more about maintaining the things that I had grown into. And that was sort of my signal that it was time to move on. It was time to find a new challenge, find something that I wasn't comfortable with, and go outside my comfort zone. And I think that if you can do that consistently within one company, that's a great way to get yourself to a good place in 10 or 15 years. But it's a balancing act.
Yeah, I wanted to share some advice that the co-founder of my company told me. And he said that, your career is going to be, 20, 25 years, and you probably want to be in a new experience every 5 years or so. Part of the reason for that is because when you do join these companies, especially smaller ones, you get stock options, which tend to vest after 4 years. So they kind of stick. If you believe in the company, you think that stock will be worth something, it's worth sticking around for those stock options to vest. After that, reassess and go from there. But yeah, I mean, I've been at Ammunix now for just a little bit over 2 years. I mean, a lot's happened in those 2 years. I'm not going to leave anytime soon, but definitely echoing what everyone else is saying, once you've learned what you're going to learn, it's probably time to move on or move to a different role, whether that's more of a management role or something like that, or a lateral move. You want to keep expanding your skill set whenever possible and get into the type of job that you really end up liking.
I think you want to expand your skill set, but you don't want to be considered a deserter either. And actually a red flag for my company is someone that moves around every 2 years. Because in our eyes, that person, so this is kind of our model. If someone's moving around every 2 years, it likely takes about 2 to 3 years for your manager to realize that you're not doing your job or you're not good at your job. And so someone who's skipping around that much, we're a little worried about, the progress that they've made at previous companies and kind of what's going on. And so, yeah, you want to move to gain different skill sets, but, kind of have a path planned out, right? And be able to explain and share why it is that you're doing what you're doing when you're interviewing, and not just like, oh, I just wanted more money, so I just left and did this, right? That's not going to go over well with your employer or your potential employer. So counter to that, I think if you're in, big pharma like I am, it's I guess more common for people to stay for a fair amount of time. There have been people who have been at Genentech for, 20 plus years, and they really love it here. And it just takes some time for them to build their skills and to elevate to a certain position. Now, that being the case, that's not the experience that everyone has here. Sometimes you feel like you kind of max out. So to everyone else's point, yeah, I guess that's the point where you kind of move on if that's truly what you want. But just be careful with just jumping around a lot after or before that.
Yeah, a kind of a counterpoint to that, I definitely 2 years is quick to move around all the time, but it is a lot easier, at least what I've seen, to get a promotion when you change jobs than to actually get it internally. But that also depends on the company that you're at. So some people will, get a promotion and after a couple months, move and then they'll get another promotion. So it is a way to kind of jump a little bit higher up in the ranks by switching jobs. But that's definitely true at Sanofi. There's been people that have been there, 30 plus years. But especially at those smaller startups, I don't think you see too many people that are there for more than 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes down to having that room to grow into, and that at a really large company, you can make those transfers. You can move to roles where you're continuing to grow, and that's definitely something that startups also offer. But I think that maybe there's some limitation in terms of a startup being able to continue moving up and finding new roles. If there's only 10 employees, there's not that many roles for you to take on.
And I think a lot of these ghosts also just of not like the movie, but like kind of finding the room to growth. It goes into having conversations with your manager and kind of telling them like what your goals are. Like you kind of say like, okay, like you always say your objectives for the beginning of the year, and then kind of into that you kind of say also like you don't really talk about a 5-year goal, but you in a way you do talk about a 5-year goal because you don't say 5-year objectives, but you can say like I want to work on this in this year because I think in the future it will help me with my career in this way. So setting those goals with your manager and kind of being upfront of what is it that you want and where you see yourself in years later, it will help you kind of either not get stuck doing the same work all over and over, or if that's what you're looking for, where you just want a 9-to-5 job and do the same work all over and over, like it will help you like manage those expectations.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jessica. And that's something that I didn't really realize or think about, is that you actually will be reviewed, right? You've got your, year-end reviews and mid-year reviews, and those are really important times to talk with your manager and figure out sort of where your game plan is and what your step to your next promotion is.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for the conversation. So we have 2 more questions we're going to try to squeeze in. One is from our audience. So Lena said, earlier you talked a lot about using the postdoc as a transition and leveraging the time to find the next position. As an immigrant, that approach gets a little more complicated, as for the visa and industry positions require that a company sponsors you. Do you have recommendations for navigating that process of sponsorship, or how to find employers willing to sponsor?
I'm pretty sure that at least Sanofi and Immunix will sponsor new employees. It depends on the company. I think a lot of the larger pharma companies will definitely sponsor you. It's just having a dialogue with them while you're going through the recruiting process.
Awesome. Do we have any more questions or comments on that question? Okay, so our last question for the afternoon is, what should early career researchers be doing in the last 2 years of grad school to focus on how to enter industry? The last 2 years advice, what would you tell yourself, I guess, 2 years out of your PhD?
Basically, I would say don't worry about the day-to-day, right? It's really going to be by that point, you probably have all the skills you would need to for your next position. So, enjoy it. And especially the last 2 years of grad school is where you're going to start going to conferences and really understand the stuff that you're doing. So really take that time to grow your network and to try to think a little bit harder about what you want to do next, and see if you could talk to people that are in those positions at conferences or just through LinkedIn, and really just be smart about where you want to go and finding those right people to connect with.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think you also just you need to understand that this is not the end of your learning process. This is the beginning of learning in a new way. So you don't need to worry that you're not going to have the skills that you need to cram and prepare to be able to do it. I think that what you should really be doing is working on yourself, focusing on what you want and how you learn best and how you grow best, and being ready for challenges and to be uncomfortable, because I think that you're probably in the first year moving into industry, you're going to learn way more than you learned in the couple previous years, just because you're going to be forced so far out of your comfort zone. So be ready for that and embrace it.
Yeah, and I think also maybe think about your expectations. What do you want to get out of industry position? You know, if you jump into a bigger company, you're going to have all the structures to kind of push you along and get you into the position. If you jump into a startup company, yeah, there will be those structures, but you know, a lot of it will come from within. So it could be a bit of a bigger culture shock. So just think about what you want. Do you want the risk associated with a small company? You want a little bit of comfort after being, you know, a lot of these contract positions. You want maybe a little bit of job security. So just think about what you want to get out of an industry position.
Awesome. Do we have any more comments from our panelists?
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing, you know, I think all of this advice was kind of what I put in my slides at the beginning. But find your mentors, and don't just find one mentor. Find a lot of people who you can draw on, who are willing to support you, who are willing to help you out. And those can be people outside your organization, people inside it. They can be peers. They can be people you look up to. Having not just a broad network, but also a smaller, close-knit network of people who you can really rely on is going to be very valuable. When you step away from the academic environment, it's very much like you're pulling up roots. And so having close contacts who you can still go to, who can support you and give you advice, is going to be really valuable.
Awesome. So with that, we can round out our event today. I'd first like to thank all of our amazing panelists for their contributions and their advice today. Thank you all. We appreciate each of you for taking the time out to talk to us and have this amazing dialogue. And thank you for the organizers and everybody involved with US HUPO to help put this event on. So this is the first event of our transition series. We look forward to having a larger conversation about how we can transition to other positions outside of industry. And so keep in contact with US HUPO via LinkedIn and Twitter, and also check out our website to stay in touch to see what events are going to be coming up next. Again, thank you all. We greatly appreciate you. And I hope everybody has a good rest of their day.